The keys clattered against the polished mahogany table as Vivian Blackwell tossed them across with undisguised contempt. "That decrepit eyesore is more than you deserve, Faith. Consider yourself fortunate we're bothering to give you anything at all." The grand library of the Blackwell estate fell silent, save for the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner. Faith Morgan sat quietly, her hands folded protectively over her 7-month pregnant belly, her eyes fixed on the tarnished brass keys that would unlock her future, whatever that might be. "Your prayers won't fix a leaking roof," Victor Blackwell, Faith's father-in-law, remarked with a sardonic smile. His wife Vivian laughed, a brittle sound devoid of warmth, while his son William adjusted his designer watch with affected disinterest. At 32, Faith never imagined she would become a widow, lose her husband Daniel to a hiking accident, and 3 days later face the contempt of his family as they divided his estate. Her son Noah, 8 years old and still struggling to understand why his father would never come home, pressed closer to her side. "The papers are clear," said Mr. Howard Stevens, the family attorney, adjusting his glasses with obvious discomfort. Daniel specifically designated the Highland Creek property to his wife, Faith. "My son was clearly not thinking straight during his final months," Victor declared, his voice hardening as he looked directly at Faith's cross necklace. "Influenced, no doubt, by those who take advantage of vulnerable men with fairy tales about eternal salvation." Faith finally reached for the keys, her fingers closing around them with quiet dignity. Her eyes met Victor's, and in that moment, something passed between them, a current of unspoken challenge. "Thank you for honoring Daniel's wishes," she said simply, her calm voice betraying none of the turmoil she felt inside. "We hope you'll find the accommodation suitable," Vivian added with venomous sweetness. "It's precisely the kind of place that appeals to people of your persuasion. Plenty of space to get down on your knees." Faith rose slowly, one hand on her belly, the other holding her son's shoulder. "Noah, it's time to go." As they walked toward the door, Faith permitted herself the slightest hint of a smile. What the Blackwells couldn't know was that Daniel had told her about the true value of the Highland Creek property 2 months before his death. Nor did they know that she had spent the weeks since his funeral researching the history of the house they dismissed as worthless. "Mommy, are you sad?" Noah whispered as they stepped out into the late autumn sunshine. Faith knelt beside her son, looking into eyes so like his father's. "No, sweetheart, I'm grateful. Your daddy left us exactly what we need." 4 days after the will reading, Faith received an email from Vivian Blackwell. "You have 1 week to collect any remaining items from the main house. After that, we'll consider them abandoned and dispose of them accordingly. P.S. I hope your imaginary friend in the sky helps with the property taxes." The Highland Creek house stood 40 minutes outside the city limits, at the end of a winding gravel road flanked by ancient oak trees. When Faith finally pulled her 10-year-old sedan up the overgrown driveway, she understood why the Blackwells had laughed so cruelly. The 2-story Victorian farmhouse looked like it had been abandoned for decades. Paint peeled from the weathered clapboards like skin after a sunburn. Several windows were cracked or missing entirely. The wraparound porch sagged dangerously on one side, and tall weeds had colonized what might once have been a garden. "Is this our new house?" Noah asked dubiously from the back seat. "It looks haunted." Faith turned off the engine and studied the structure carefully. Despite its dilapidated appearance, she recognized it immediately. "Yes, it is. And do you know something? Your father brought me here once, 6 years ago. He said it was special, a place with secrets that his family would never understand." Daniel had been mysterious about the property back then. He'd spoken of hidden treasure and remarkable discoveries. Faith had assumed he was being metaphorical, referring to the house's historical significance, or perhaps its potential after renovation. Now, staring at what everyone else considered worthless, she began to wonder if Daniel had meant something far more literal. As they cautiously explored the dusty rooms, Faith's phone rang. It was William Blackwell. his words slightly slurred despite the early hour. "Enjoying your inheritance, Faith?" he asked with undisguised malice. "Dad always said that house was a burden. He spent a fortune trying to demolish it back in the 90s, but the structure was too solid. Now it's your problem." "Too solid?" Faith repeated, feigning confusion while her heart accelerated. "What does that mean?" "It means you'll waste more money trying to repair that heap than it could ever be worth," William replied. "Or you could just admit defeat and sell it back to us for 10,000. That's our first and final offer." After William hung up, Faith stood in what had once been the main parlor, processing his words. Too solid to demolish. Daniel had mentioned something similar years ago about how the house had survived fires, storms, and even deliberate attempts to tear it down. "It's like it's indestructible," he had said, gazing at the walls with an admiration that had seemed excessive at the time. "Mom, come see this," Noah called from upstairs. "I found something weird." Faith hurried up the creaking staircase to find her son in the master bedroom, running his small hand along the wall with a puzzled expression. "These walls are strange," he said. "When I knock on them, they sound different from our apartment walls, like they're super hard inside." Faith pressed her palm against the surface. The wallpaper was faded and peeling, but beneath it, the wall felt unusually solid. When she rapped her knuckles against it, the sound was indeed peculiar, dense and resonant rather than hollow. That evening, after settling Noah to sleep in their small rented apartment, Faith stayed up researching the property's history online. What she discovered made her wonder if Daniel had been far more strategic in his decisions than anyone could have imagined. The house had been built in 1863 by a geologist named Elijah Stone. Historical records revealed that Stone had discovered a significant diamond deposit in the nearby mountains, but died before revealing its exact location. Most fascinating was a footnote in an obscure academic article. Stone was rumored to have incorporated microscopic industrial diamonds into the construction materials of his residence, creating a structure of remarkable durability that has withstood all attempts at demolition over the centuries. At 2 a.m, Faith finally understood why Daniel had insisted she explore every corner of the house during their only visit. He hadn't been sentimental. He'd been preparing her for this moment. The next day she returned to the house with borrowed tools and a determination that surprised even Noah. "Are you sure about this, Mom? Shouldn't we ask someone for help?" "Not yet," Faith replied, carefully examining a section of wall where the wallpaper had peeled away naturally. "First, I need to understand what we're dealing with." As she delicately scraped away at a small area with a putty knife, her phone rang. It was Vivian Blackwell, her voice laden with artificial concern. "Faith, dear, I've heard from the caretaker that you're attempting to renovate that horrible house. You do realize you're going to spend far more money than it's worth, don't you?" "I'm just doing some basic cleaning," Faith lied, watching as tiny crystalline fragments glittered in the morning light streaming through the broken window. "Well, I have a generous offer for you," Vivian continued. "William is willing to buy the property for $15,000. That's significantly more than it's worth, but we consider it family charity." The word charity was delivered with such condescension that Faith almost laughed. $15,000 for a house potentially worth millions. "That's an interesting offer," Faith replied noncommittally, studying what appeared to be veins of diamond composite running through the interior wall structure. "Indeed, you could use that money to rent a decent apartment in the city, in a neighborhood more suitable for people like you. Think of Noah and the baby. They deserve to grow up in a proper environment, not some delusion." After Vivian hung up, Faith stared at the crystalline fragments in her palm, marveling at their clarity and hardness. 15,000 for a house that might be worth millions. The Blackwells' arrogance knew no bounds. That afternoon, Faith did something she hadn't done since Daniel's funeral. She called Dr. Benjamin Andrews, a longtime family friend who worked as a materials scientist at the State University. Daniel had always said that Ben was one of the most trustworthy people he knew, someone who could be counted on completely. Faith, I'm so sorry about Daniel. He was a remarkable man, Ben said when she explained the situation. You mentioned you suspect there are diamonds incorporated into the structure of the house. I know it sounds incredible. Actually, it doesn't, Ben interrupted. There are historical records of 19th century prospectors and geologists incorporating valuable minerals directly into their buildings as a form of secure storage. It was a way to hide wealth in plain sight, particularly during unstable times. Ben agreed to visit the property discreetly over the weekend, bringing portable testing equipment. But Faith, if your suspicion is correct, you need to be extremely careful. Properties with that kind of value attract unwanted attention. Meanwhile, the Blackwells intensified their pressure. Victor showed up at the house unannounced on Thursday, finding Faith cleaning the downstairs rooms while Noah explored the overgrown yard. Good heavens! Do you really believe you can salvage this wreck? He asked incredulously, kicking at a loose floorboard. Look at this place. The structure is completely compromised. You'll spend $100,000 just to make it habitable. Perhaps, Faith replied calmly, continuing her work. She had learned to read the signs. The more agitated Victor became, the more nervous he was about something. Listen, I'll be direct. Our family has plans for this area. Commercial development. If you sell now, everyone benefits. If you insist on staying, you might find that having business neighbors can be complicated. The veiled threat hung in the air like smoke. Victor continued, Besides, are you certain you can afford the property taxes? I hear they've increased significantly this year. After he left, Faith realized the Blackwells weren't just trying to humiliate her. They were desperately trying to force her to surrender the property before she discovered something they suspected but couldn't confirm. On Saturday, Dr. Andrews arrived early, driving an unmarked car and carrying equipment in ordinary duffel bags. I hope I'm wrong and you're right, he said with a smile as he set up a portable spectrometer and hardness tester. The first readings were inconclusive, but when they reached the master bedroom on the second floor, the equipment began emitting consistent, strong signals. Faith, Ben whispered, staring at the display. These numbers are extraordinary. They systematically tested every wall in the house. The results were unequivocal. The entire structure contained significant amounts of industrial-grade diamonds, not just as decoration, but as an integral part of the construction. Elijah Stone had literally built a house of diamond composite, disguised under decades of conventional surface materials. How much could it be worth? Faith asked, her voice barely containing her amazement. Ben performed some calculations on his tablet. Conservatively, between 25 and 30 million, possibly more depending on the purity and complete distribution. That night, while Noah slept, Faith lay awake planning her next steps. She would need specialized legal assistance, an independent appraiser, and strategies to protect the property before the Blackwells discovered what they had lost. But first, she would exercise something Daniel had always admired in her: strategic patience. She would let the Blackwells continue making ridiculous offers and veiled threats while she documented every attempt at coercion and every disparaging comment about her faith. On Monday, Vivian called again. Faith, Victor says you still haven't accepted our offer. Frankly, we're losing patience. 20,000, final offer. I'll consider it, Faith replied, looking out the window at the house the Blackwells considered worthless. Behind its deteriorated exterior, a fortune waited patiently for someone with enough faith to recognize its true value. For the first time since the funeral, she felt a genuine smile form, not just from relief, but from anticipation, because something extraordinary was about to happen, something that would completely rewrite the rules of the game the Blackwells thought they were winning, turning every gesture of arrogance into evidence of their own blindness. Sweetheart, you had a loving husband who understood value better than his family ever could, she whispered to herself, remembering Daniel's words about seeing beyond the surface. The following Wednesday, Faith scheduled a formal meeting with the entire Blackwell family at Mr. Stevens' office. "I agree to discuss selling the property," she announced calmly over the phone to Vivian, who immediately called an emergency family meeting. "But I want everyone present to sign the papers. Victor, you, William, and any other interested heirs." Vivian could barely contain her triumph. "You've finally come to your senses. I knew you'd realize that house is nothing but a burden." What the Blackwells didn't know was that Faith had spent the last 2 weeks meticulously documenting every attempt at intimidation, every threat, every derogatory comment about her religious beliefs. Dr. Andrews had brought in a certified independent appraiser, and she had hired attorney Sarah Wellington, who specialized in property law and religious discrimination cases. At 2 o'clock sharp, the Blackwells arrived at the office like predators surrounding wounded prey. William carried an expensive bottle of champagne, barely concealed in his briefcase. Vivian had even brought a bouquet of lilies to celebrate your sensible decision, as she explained with false generosity. "Let's get down to business," Victor said, rubbing his hands together eagerly. 25,000 final offer. It's more than generous, considering the taxes you'll save." Mr. Stevens seemed uncomfortable with the predatory atmosphere. "Well, technically, Mrs. Morgan is entitled to an independent appraisal before any—" "Not necessary," Vivian interrupted. "We all know that property isn't worth the taxes she'd have to pay. We're being charitable here." Faith smiled for the first time in the meeting. "You're right about one thing. The property has been appraised." She slid a folder across the mahogany table. "By 3 different independent specialists." William laughed as he casually opened the folder. "Let me guess. Someone said it's worth 50,000. Still, our offer is—" His voice died as his eyes focused on the first document. The number highlighted in bold on the official materials analysis report made his face drain of color. $27,400,000. This has to be wrong," he stammered, passing the document to Victor with visibly shaking hands. "It can't be right." "Actually, it's conservative," said Dr. Andrews, entering the office at that precise moment. "After further testing, we estimate between 27 and 30 million, depending on extraction methods and market conditions." Victor stared at the document as if it were written in an incomprehensible language. "Diamonds? In the walls? How? How did you know about this?" "Because my husband told me 2 months before he died," Faith replied calmly. "He discovered it accidentally during research on Elijah Stone. Daniel wanted to protect me and our children, so he left the property specifically to me, knowing you would consider it worthless." William stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. "That's impossible. Dad would have known. He would never have kept something like this from us." "How did you hide the family company's mounting debts?" Faith asked softly, sliding another folder across the table. "Or the attempts to sell family assets without proper disclosure to shareholders?" The revelations accumulated like an avalanche, documents proving William had mismanaged company funds, recordings of conversations where Vivian planned to force Faith to relinquish any inheritance, emails detailing how they intended to use religious discrimination to intimidate her into giving up. "You recorded our conversations," Vivian whispered, her voice finally losing its haughty edge. "I documented everything," Faith confirmed, playing a crystal-clear phone conversation on her tablet. Victor's voice filled the room. "Let her try to fight it in court. A pregnant widow, with her superstitious beliefs against our family name and connections. She'll give up in weeks when she realizes she can't afford proper legal representation." The silence that followed was broken only by Vivian's uneven breathing. The realization of what they had lost and how their own words had betrayed them was too devastating to process. Attorney Wellington finally spoke. "In addition to retaining full ownership of the property, my client is considering legal action for religious discrimination, coercion, and attempted fraud. The recordings and documents provide substantial evidence for significant damages." Victor attempted one last desperate gambit. Listen, we can work something out. You keep the house, and we split the profits from the diamond extraction. 50-50. Faith looked at him with quiet dignity. Victor, you just discovered you tried to steal $30 million from your son's pregnant widow and 8-year-old grandson, and now you want to negotiate? She gathered her documents calmly. The property is legally mine. Any lawsuits against your family will proceed as necessary, and you have 72 hours to transfer any remaining assets still in Daniel's name. The forensic accountant also discovered several tax irregularities that will need to be addressed. Vivian raised her tear-stained face. Faith, please, we're family. Family, Faith repeated softly. I remember you saying that a decrepit house was more than I deserved, that my children should grow up somewhere appropriate rather than with a mother who believes in salvation. Now you realize you've squandered the opportunity of your lives because of pure prejudice. She walked toward the door, then turned back one final time. The irony is rather poetic, isn't it? You tried to give me trash as my inheritance, but what you thought was worthless is worth more than everything you own combined. As the revelations continued and the masks fell away, a question hung in the tension-filled air. Was it possible that an entire family fortune could crumble because of the very arrogance they believed to be their greatest strength? What would happen when their social circle discovered that the prestigious Blackwells had lost millions because of their contempt for faith, proving that sometimes justice arrives in ways more poetic than even the most creative mind could imagine? 6 months after the devastating meeting at the attorney's office, Faith's life had transformed in ways she could never have anticipated. The historic stone house was now home to the Cornerstone Foundation, an organization dedicated to preserving historic properties in underprivileged communities and providing free legal assistance to families experiencing housing discrimination. Noah, now 9, attended a good school with a strong arts program that nurtured his creative talents. Not because Faith wanted to flaunt her wealth, but because she could finally provide her son with the opportunities Daniel had always envisioned for their family. The boy had developed an interest in geology and architecture, inspired by Elijah Stone's remarkable creation. "Mom, there's another invitation," Noah announced one morning, handing Faith an elegant envelope bearing the crest of one of the city's oldest families. "That's the 4th one this month." Faith laughed as she prepared breakfast in the renovated kitchen that had been built in what was once the house's formal dining room. The diamond composite structure remained largely untouched out of respect for Elijah Stone's ingenuity, but she had created comfortable living spaces that honored both the historical significance and modern functionality. "Mrs. Eleanor Pembroke requests the honor of your presence at their annual charity gala," she read aloud, shaking her head with amusement. "The same Eleanor Pembroke who pretended not to see us at the grocery store last year." Meanwhile, the Blackwells faced a very different reality. William had lost not only the court case, which resulted in a $4 million judgment for religious discrimination and attempted fraud, but also his position at the family company. Recordings of his contemptuous conversations had circulated among business associates, severely damaging his professional reputation. Vivian had discovered that her social standing was remarkably fragile when confronted with public scandal. The Women's Association had quietly removed her from the board, and the charity functions she once dominated mysteriously stopped including her name on their invitation lists. "I heard they've moved to a condominium in Florida," Dr. Andrews commented during one of his visits to the foundation. William tried to secure investment partners in 3 different cities, but his history follows him. Faith nodded without malice, focused on reviewing applications for the foundation's housing assistance program. "Sometimes the consequences of our choices take time to arrive, but they always do." Medahi. The most remarkable transformation had occurred within the local community. Faith's story had inspired dozens of other families to question predatory property contracts and discriminatory housing practices. The Cornerstone Foundation had already helped more than 40 families recover or retain homes that had been threatened through questionable legal maneuvers. Attorney Wellington, who had become not only the Foundation's chief counsel but also a close friend, often remarked on the poetic justice of the situation. The Blackwells spent years accumulating property through dubious means, and now you're helping dismantle similar empires one deed at a time. One October afternoon, almost exactly a year after Daniel's death, Faith received an unexpected visitor at the Foundation's office. It was Victor Blackwell, looking much older and considerably less imposing than he had at the will reading. "I wasn't sure you'd agree to see me," he said, declining Faith's offer of coffee. His hands trembled slightly as he placed a small box on her desk. "These are Daniel's childhood mementos, things his mother saved. I thought perhaps Noah and the baby might want them someday." Faith gently opened the box, finding school awards, handmade cards, and photographs of a young Daniel. "Thank you for bringing these," she said quietly. Victor stared out the window at the gardens where several families were touring the Foundation's newly completed community center. William lost everything. The drinking got worse. Vivian left last month. Faith remained silent, giving him space to continue. "I never understood Daniel's faith," Victor finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "I thought it made him weak, vulnerable. But he saw things I couldn't see. Value where I saw only waste." He paused, visibly struggling. Is there any way to make amends?" Faith considered his question carefully. "This isn't about punishment, Victor. It's about choices and consequences. You didn't lose everything because I wanted revenge. You lost everything because your family made decisions based on arrogance and contempt for beliefs you didn't share." She paused, feeling the weight of responsibility that her unexpected fortune had brought. "But I will offer one thing. The Foundation has a reconciliation program for families fractured by discrimination and misunderstanding. If you're willing to participate genuinely in counseling and community service, we can help rebuild some bridges." Victor's eyes filled with tears. You would do that? After everything?" "I would do it because it's the right thing to do," Faith replied. "Not because you deserve it, but because every person deserves a chance to become better than they were yesterday." 3 months after that conversation, Victor Blackwell began volunteering at the Cornerstone Foundation's community outreach program. He was a visibly changed man, but for the first time in his life, he seemed to be genuinely trying to understand perspectives beyond his own limited viewpoint. William never participated in the reconciliation programs, but he sent a formal letter of apology that Faith accepted with grace. It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning. During the Foundation's first anniversary celebration held at Stonehouse itself, Faith was asked to speak to an audience of more than 300 people, including community leaders, activists, and families who had received assistance from the organization. 2 years ago, I sat in a room where people told me that an abandoned house was all I deserved, she began, her voice carrying through the main hall where the diamond-infused walls caught the afternoon light in subtle, remarkable ways. They laughed when they gave me the keys, thinking they were humiliating me. The audience fell completely silent. Today, that house stands as a testament that no injustice remains hidden forever, that no prejudice is stronger than truth, and that sometimes what others consider worthless contains the greatest value of all. Her newborn daughter, Hope, slept peacefully in the arms of a Foundation volunteer, while Noah stood proudly at his mother's side. My husband found a way to protect us even after his death, Faith continued, leaving not just a material legacy, but a powerful lesson that sometimes the very thing people mock becomes the cornerstone of something greater than they could imagine. Noah, preparing to turn 10 and already showing the quiet intelligence that had characterized his father, often asked his mother if she harbored anger toward the Blackwells. "Anger consumes the person who carries it," Faith always answered. "I chose to use that energy to build something they could never destroy. The best revenge isn't defeating your enemies. It's becoming so fulfilled that they become irrelevant to your happiness." The Cornerstone Foundation continued to grow, not only as a social justice organization, but as living proof that sometimes the universe has a perfect sense of poetic timing. The Blackwells had tried to give trash as an inheritance, but ended up handing over the keys to a transformation that would completely rewrite the rules of the game they thought they were winning. And every time Faith walked through the halls of the house that was once considered a worthless ruin, she smiled, remembering Daniel's favorite Bible verse. "The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone." Sometimes justice doesn't arrive like thunder, but like a diamond revelation hidden beneath layers of contempt, waiting patiently for the right person to discover that even what seems worthless can contain treasures beyond imagination. On the anniversary of Daniel's passing, Faith stood in the garden with her children, planting a tree in his memory. Victor joined them, awkwardly at first, then with growing sincerity as he helped Noah dig the hole. "He would be proud of what you've built," Victor said quietly. "He knew what he was doing all along," Faith replied, watching Hope toddle unsteadily through the grass. Daniel understood that true value isn't always visible on the surface. Sometimes you need faith to see it. As the sun set behind the diamond house that shimmered almost imperceptibly in the fading light, Faith thought about how life's greatest gifts sometimes come disguised as our greatest challenges. The house that was meant to be her humiliation had become her ministry, her purpose, her cornerstone. And in that moment, surrounded by her children and even the father-in-law who had once despised her, Faith felt Daniel's presence more strongly than she had since his death. Not as a ghost or a supernatural visitation, but as the living legacy of love and foresight that continued to protect and provide for those he had cherished most. "Thank you," she whispered to the evening sky, "for giving me the eyes to see what others missed." Noah looked up at his mother curiously. "Are you talking to Dad?" Faith smiled, placing her hand on her son's shoulder. "In a way. I'm thanking him for teaching me that sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone with enough faith to discover them." As darkness fell, lights came on throughout the house, warm, welcoming beacons that transformed what had once been abandoned into a symbol of hope. The diamond walls that had made the house too solid to destroy now supported a foundation in more ways than one, standing as a testament to resilience, faith, and the remarkable ways that injustice sometimes rights itself when confronted with truth. Victor watched the house glowing in the twilight. "I never really looked at it before," he admitted. "I only saw what I expected to see." "That's how most of us live," Faith replied gently. "We see what we expect until something forces us to look deeper." As they walked back toward the house, Faith felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her, not just for the material security the diamond house had provided, but for the greater lesson it represented, that sometimes the most powerful response to prejudice isn't anger, but patience, not retaliation, but transformation. The Blackwells had tried to burden her with what they considered worthless. Instead, they had given her exactly what she needed, to build something extraordinary, a foundation, both literal and figurative, that would support not just her family, but countless others for generations to come. And in that unexpected turn of events, Faith found the most meaningful inheritance of all, the opportunity to transform contempt into compassion, rejection into purpose, and an abandoned house into a home for hope. The end of one story had become the beginning of something far greater than anyone could have imagined, all because one woman had the faith to look beyond appearances and discover the diamond truth hidden beneath the surface of a house that others had abandoned, but God had prepared precisely for her moment of greatest need.